He might be the coolest suspect ever in a police station. Despite being covered in wounds and with his hands cuffed, he calmly lit a cigarette. Then he pulled out a can of tuna and slowly opened it with a can opener. But he wasn't planning on eating it himself. Instead, he took out an adorable little cat from inside his jacket and placed it on the interrogation table to feast on the tuna. His unbelievable action stunned the two police officers sitting across from him. They had no idea who this man was. "I'm just a nobody." Just last week, he was an ordinary middle-aged man like so many others. Every day, he would go to his tedious statistical job and come home to sleep. He was like an emotionless machine, endlessly repeating his boring life. Sadly, every time he came home, his son didn't even bother to greet him and acted as if he didn't exist. As for his wife, even though they still shared a bed, a thick wall of pillows separated them. It had been a long time since the couple was intimate, so he had no outlet for his frustration. His only relief was staring at his wife's beautiful promotional photo while doing pull-ups every morning. This poor middle-aged man went on repeating this routine all week. That night, filled with pent-up frustration and unable to sleep, he got up to check on his kids. His youngest was sound asleep, but when he opened the door to his older son's room, he saw the boy with wide, tense eyes. Gesturing to him that there was a noise outside, the man, whose name was Hutch, quietly went downstairs to check on the situation. As soon as he entered the living room, he found the front door had been pried open, and two masked intruders in black were breaking into the house. Hutch calmly grabbed a golf club and was about to call the police, but as he dialed, the two robbers spotted him. One of them pointed a gun at Hutch, threatening him to hand over all his money. Hutch didn't want to argue with them because his whole family was sleeping upstairs. He intended to give them some loose change to get rid of them. But they found the amount too small and tried to take his watch. Hutch suddenly noticed they had a distinctive tattoo on their wrists. Just as the man took the watch and was about to snatch his wedding ring, someone unexpectedly lunged forward and knocked the masked man down. It turned out to be Hutch's older son. The female robber, holding a gun, frantically pointed it at the two men struggling on the floor and yelled loudly. Seeing the situation escalate, Hutch swung his golf club, intending to strike the female robber, but the club stopped midair. In the end, he didn't strike. Not only that, he also told his son, who was holding down the robber, to let go. His son couldn't believe what his father was saying but still released the robber, only to be punched hard in the face. At this point, Hutch's wife also came out. The two masked robbers saw more people in the house and the situation turning against them, so they angrily cursed a few words, opened the door and left. Although the robbers escaped and everyone in the house was safe, his son resented him. It was a good chance to catch them, but he let them get away for nothing. Hutch's cowardice also earned him the contempt of the young police officer who arrived later. After the police left, his wife's gaze was filled with complex emotions that stirred a strange anger within him. The couple should have sat down and talked about it, but they just lay silently in bed. No one broke the suffocating silence, as it had been so long since they last talked that they didn't even know where to begin. Hutch was upset and went downstairs to lie on the couch alone. Looking at old photos of him and his wife, he couldn't understand why things had turned out this way, but there was still someone in the house who cared about him. His youngest child ran and climbed onto him, the only person in the house who still talked to him. Hutch was woken up by a sound outside the window. He had missed the garbage truck again. So his mood was terrible all day. His son had clearly mocked him coldly, and the only thing his wife said to him that morning was about him missing the garbage truck again. Only his little daughter smiled to comfort him and gave him a tight hug. When he left for work, his neighbor saw him and taunted him right in front of his son. The guy even showed off his super cool 1972 Challenger supercar. with a 49-liter V8 engine and deliberately revved it up before speeding off. It seemed like everyone wanted to show off in front of him. As usual, Hutch went to work at the steel fabrication plant co-founded by his father-in-law and brother-in-law. His brother-in-law also had no respect for a useless freeloader like him. After hearing about last night's incident, he suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Hutch's head. It turned out he was giving it to him, telling him he needed to know how to protect his sister. Hutch didn't want to hold a gun, but he couldn't refuse, so he secretly hid it in an empty box in the company's fridge. Hutch just stayed in his office all day, not in the mood to work. He just kept drawing the bird tattoo he had seen on paper. When no one was around to bother him, he locked the office door and opened the cabinet. Inside was an old English rotary speaker. Hutch switched to a special communication channel to talk to a mysterious person about what happened last night. It seemed that whenever he had free time, Hutch would find this mysterious person to talk to. They didn't hide anything from each other, and this time, Hutch revealed the real reason he didn't swing the club last night. It turned out that from the first glance, he had recognized the classic .38 caliber revolver, which hadn't been used in a long time. Most importantly, he immediately saw that it wasn't loaded. So from that moment on, he knew the two intruders weren't truly dangerous. After confiding in his friend, Hutch felt a lot better. He decided to visit his father at the nursing home and have lunch with him. His father took one look at him and knew Hutch was troubled. It seemed the old man wasn't ordinary either. Hutch eventually returned home. He looked through the window and sighed at the sight of the three people inside. This was still his family. After all, no matter how frustrating life was, he had to go on. Even if his son was as distant as ever, Hutch was used to it. But just then, his youngest daughter's words were like scissors cutting the last nerve he was holding onto. It turned out that her little bead necklace, which she kept in a bowl, had gone missing, and that bowl was the same one the two thieves had rummaged through for money last night. They could have stolen anything else, but his beloved daughter's belongings were absolutely off limits. With a grim face, Hutch turned and walked straight out of the house. In this moment, he decided he wouldn't hold back anymore. He went back to the nursing home and into his father's room, where he put on a jacket. He took out his father's FBI agent card from over 20 years ago and carried a gun with him. Ready for action, Hutch took a bus and went to every tattoo parlor in the city, impersonating an FBI agent and asking the owners about the whereabouts of the person with the bird tattoo. He went from one shop to another and finally ran into trouble at one of them. When he pulled out the fake card, a seasoned person recognized it, pointing out that the card had expired a long time ago. Before he could even ask, he was seen as a troublemaker and surrounded by a group of men in the shop. Just then, an old man next to him glanced over and clearly saw the playing card tattoo on Hutch's wrist. It was the 7 of spades and the 2 of diamonds. The two worst cards in Texas hold him. As an old pro in the underworld, the old man understood who this middle-aged man in front of him truly was. You must be a member of some special military unit that handles all the dirty work. The old man's face went pale with fear. He silently walked into the room and locked the iron door tightly behind him. This action stunned everyone present. Even the boss holding the brass knuckles changed his attitude to one of respect. Hutch finally tracked down the thieving couple. He quietly broke into the house and pistol-whipped the man, making blood gush from his mouth. Hutch got his watch back, but when he asked about his daughter's necklace, the man claimed he had no idea what Hutch was talking about. Rage flared in Hutch's eyes. He wanted to pull the trigger and take down the bald man in front of him. Because no one was allowed to steal his daughter's things, the man swore he knew nothing and had never seen any necklace. Just as Hutch, consumed by anger, was about to pull the trigger, the cry of a baby suddenly reached his ears. He rushed to the bedroom door, looked inside, and saw a newborn baby crying loudly in its crib. The sudden noise must have startled it awake. Being a father himself, Hutch couldn't bring himself to do it anymore. He could only curse under his breath before turning and leaving the house. Hutch searched all night but came up empty-handed. You can only imagine his disappointment. He had promised his daughter he would get her necklace back, but now he was returning with nothing. The frustration was unbearable, so he repeatedly punched a stone wall until his knuckles were raw and bloody before he finally stopped. He silently rode the bus back home. As it was the last bus of the night, there weren't many passengers on board. Just then, a Hummer Jeep swerved and sped towards the bus. Unable to swerve in time, it crashed straight into the roadside barrier. The bus shook violently and came to a stop. 5 drunken thugs stumbled out of the Hummer. They boarded the bus and herded all the male passengers off. Then, they surrounded the only young woman left on the bus. At this moment, Hutch let out a laugh. He knew that all the pent-up frustration he'd been holding in finally had a way out. He walked past the thugs, who assumed he was just in a hurry to get off the bus. To their surprise, Hutch pushed the female bus driver out and slammed the door shut. The thugs then realized something wasn't right. The middle-aged man in front of them seemed to be trouble. "I'm going to smash all of you." The thugs thought he was joking, but to their disbelief, Hutch actually lunged forward and started fighting them with his bare hands. Since it had probably been a while since he had a real fight, Hutch was a bit slow at first, and his movements weren't very fluid, but the more he fought, the more he got back in the groove. He was badly beaten himself, his face bruised and even a knife wound on his hip. For a man like him, his strength was his ability to take a punch. Better to injure 1,000 of the enemy than sacrifice 800 of yourself. One of the thugs threw Hutch through the glass window and onto the street. The thugs thought the fight was over. To their surprise, Hutch, full of determination, got back on the bus. Even though he was spitting up blood, nothing could stop his resolve to take them all down. And so, the second round of the fight began. This time, Hutch became even more violent. He plunged a small knife into a vulnerable spot on his opponent. The blonde thug saw the critical situation and rushed to the front of the bus to pick up the gun Hutch had dropped. He tried to load the gun, but Hutch wouldn't let him. Hutch spun around, grabbed a steel bar, and swung it hard at the blonde man. The final blow landed directly on his throat, crushing his larynx. Seeing the blonde thug about to take his last breath, Hutch suddenly felt a pang of compassion. He picked up a straw from the floor, used the knife to make an incision in the thug's throat, and inserted the straw to give him a little more time to live. Hutch staggered off the bus and stumbled away under the terrified gaze of the bus driver. He quietly stepped into his house, and just as he was about to go upstairs, he saw his wife sitting in the living room, waiting for him. Seeing Hutch's battered state, she was stunned, unable to comprehend what her seemingly weak husband had gone through that night. She still helped him tend to his wounds, and it was clear she had done this for Hutch many times in their younger days. She expertly used glue to seal his knife wounds, and in that moment, Hutch couldn't help but pour his heart out to his wife. They used to be a passionate couple, but for years there were no hugs, no kisses, no intimacy. They had become two strangers sharing a bed, dreaming different dreams. When she heard the man who lay beside her every night say he missed her, she couldn't hold back her tears. She knew that for all those years, she had truly lacked an emotional connection with Hutch. Finally, that night, she took down the invisible walls separating them. As Hutch and his wife reconnected emotionally, on the other side of the city, a Range Rover suddenly swerved and stopped arrogantly on the side of the road. An old man stepped out of the car and went straight into his bar. This man's name was Julian, the infamous leader of the city's largest Russian gang. As the boss, he gleefully got on stage to dance and sing alongside beautiful women. Even though he was 5 keys off pitch, the audience below cheered and praised him. After getting the crowd hyped up, Julian went into a private room. While his underlings continued to applaud, only the old Russian men who were his business partners looked grim. It turned out they felt it was a loss of face for the gang leader to be dancing and singing like that. Julian, who was enjoying himself, scowled after hearing those words. He smashed the wine glass in his hand and pointed a sharp shard of glass at the man who had spoken. A large bodyguard rushed over, delivered a flurry of punches and kicks, and finally coldly slit the man's throat. One moment he was smiling kindly, and the next he had turned into a devil. This was Julian's true face. The accomplices were so terrified they didn't dare utter a sound. Just then Julian's phone rang. After listening, his expression suddenly changed. It turned out the blond man Hutch had slid and put a straw in was his own younger brother. Standing by the hospital bed, the mob boss Julian was in tears. The blond man was now a vegetable, and Julian had no idea who had dared to touch his brother. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a chair and slammed it down on another henchman lying on a hospital bed. The blow was incredibly powerful, but the guy was completely innocent. They had no idea who had beaten them. All they knew was that he was an ordinary-looking man on a bus. While Julian was still rampaging through the hospital room, unable to find Hutch, the injured thug raised his hand. It turned out he had picked up the mysterious man's bus pass on the bus. From this moment on, the gears of destiny, with their powerful pull, began to spin wildly. Julian hired a young, super hacker to work for him. Using the bus pass, the female hacker traced an old man who lived in a nursing home. And from there, she was able to track down Hutch's personal information. The hacker found this middle-aged man to be utterly ordinary. But Julian, who had gone through hell and high water, didn't think so. How could an ordinary middle-aged man take down 5 men? The hacker decided to access higher-level security data. She sent a blackmail email to a researcher who worked at the Pentagon. The email was filled with sensitive photos of the researcher engaging in perverted acts. The hacker used them to threaten the man into looking up Hutch's file. The researcher was forced to connect to the internal network to search for information on Hutch. But to his surprise, the system denied access. Fearing that his dirty photos would be exposed, he took a desperate risk, sneaking into an underground file archive that had long been sealed. He finally found the documents on Hutch, but to his shock, all the important information in the file was blacked out, and along with it were a series of photos. When the female hacker received the document, she saw horrific photos documenting secret executions. She was so terrified that she packed all her things, threw the file at Julian, and quit, not even asking for her salary. Julian looked at the pile of photos scattered on the floor. Only then did he realize that the person who had attacked his brother was not someone to be trifled with. But he was determined to get his revenge. Meanwhile, Hutch, after last night, had re-established a physical and emotional connection with his wife, and was now full of life again. He prepared a big feast for the whole family, and as they happily sat down at the dinner table, Hutch happened to look out the window and saw 3 cars speeding toward the house. The men inside were carrying heavy weapons and wearing masks. His instincts told him they were coming for him, so he quickly told his family to get to the basement shelter. His wife didn't know what was happening. Just as she was about to ask, Hutch cut her off with an aggressive kiss. Then, while his family was still in a daze, Hutch locked them behind the iron door. The group of assassins in black, holding guns, quickly approached the house in a V formation. This was the most elite task force of the Russian gang. Each one was equipped with a CSG SG-552 assault rifle, complete with an EO tech sight, tactical flashlight, and a Magpul AFG grip. This is a gun that appears in many action movies, At this point, Hutch had cut the power in the house. He took a baseball bat and, hidden in the darkness, began his fierce counterattack. After taking down two of them with the baseball bat, he pulled out a paring knife from the kitchen and continued his relentless assault. Hutch used everything in the house, turning them into weapons to fight back against the enemy. Meanwhile, his house was being riddled with bullets from the CSG SG-552s. Like a beehive, even though he took down many more on his own, he couldn't stand against the sheer numbers and was eventually ambushed from behind and knocked unconscious. He was thrown into the trunk of a car. The assault team had suffered heavy losses. A dozen or so men were now down to just 3. As the 3 remaining soldiers were bragging on their way back, they had no idea that Hutch had woken up in the trunk. He gritted his teeth, endured the pain, and strained to get his hands out of the cuffs. Then he grabbed a fire extinguisher and fought back. Hutch stumbled out of the car. He wasn't seriously injured, but the 3 men in the car were barely breathing. Only the black man was still clinging to life. The black man had no idea who the terrifying person in front of him was. So, for the first time in his life, Hutch proactively revealed his true identity. It turned out he used to be a secret assassin for the CIA. With the code name, the Auditor, he specialized in handling people who couldn't be arrested, but absolutely had to disappear. Hutch was about to pour his heart out about his life, but when he looked down, he realized the black man had been dead for a while. He rushed home and called his father, warning him to be careful because someone might come looking for him. To his surprise, his father laughed upon hearing the news, as if he was looking forward to someone coming to cause trouble. And just then, 2 thugs had crept into the nursing home and quietly opened his father's room door. Seeing the old man fast asleep, the 2 men were about to take the opportunity to finish him off. But he suddenly opened his eyes. With a calm, emotionless expression, he raised his gun and, shot by shot, took down both burly men. It turned out the old man was also a force to be reckoned with. Hutch returned home, turned on the lights, and saw a scene of utter destruction with bodies scattered all over the room. If his wife and kids saw this, they would be terrified. But this house was no longer a place for his family to stay. Hutch quickly washed his face, opened the iron door to the shelter, led his shocked wife and kids out, and got them into the car. He had to get his family out of here before he could rest easy and deal with what came next. For the first time, his wife felt as if the husband in front of her was a complete stranger. But in this moment, she could only trust him unconditionally. "I'll take the kids somewhere safe and wait for you to come back." No longer burdened, Hutch brought out the gold bars he had risked his life to accumulate over the years. He arranged all the corpses on the sofa, turning them into an audience, and began to tell them his story. The reason why he went from a cold-blooded assassin to a family man. It was during an execution when a traitor knelt before him, sobbing and begging for his life. The man swore he would change his life. And for some reason, Hutch had a strange, uncharacteristic moment of weakness. He let the man go, and a year later he found that the traitor had truly changed. He had a family and was living happily with his wife and children. Hutch stood outside the window and for the first time felt that such a life was truly good. Suddenly, he no longer wanted to return to his old life. He wanted to get married, settle down, and live a peaceful life. So he decided to leave the CIA for good and become a regular person. After getting all the secrets off his chest, Hutch felt much lighter, and he lit his house on fire. Just as he was about to drive away, he suddenly remembered his neighbor's cool Challenger. Since he wasn't coming back anyway, he decided to see if the car was as fun to drive as people said. Hutch dumped a pile of gold in front of his brother-in-law to buy the entire factory. His brother-in-law couldn't believe that the brother-in-law he always looked down on was this rich. He tried to put up a fight, but in the end, Hutch gave him a punch that made him yield completely. Hutch didn't buy the factory to use it as a hideout, but rather to turn it into a battlefield. He used all the available materials to create a series of traps and weapons, both hot and cold, just waiting for the enemy to show up. After taking care of that, Hutch made his next move. He sought out a mysterious friend in the city. Through his friend's underground channels, he got all the information about his enemy, Julian. Julian was the most brutal leader of the Russian gang. In addition to typical criminal activities like drug trafficking, he was also in charge of managing the Russian mafia's massive pension fund, the Obchak. This was the organization's most crucial asset. If anything were to happen to this fund, Julian's position would crumble. Having learned this information, Hutch took action. He found the main warehouse where the Obchak was stored, armed with a CSG-552 he had taken from an enemy. He swept through the entire vault, eliminating every single guard in the main warehouse. Meanwhile, Julian was singing in his bar as usual, completely unaware that his headquarters had been leveled. After taking down all the enemies, Hutch poured a large amount of gasoline into the fire extinguishing system and set all the money on fire, burning it to ashes. Just as the showman Julian finished a powerful song on stage, he spotted the seemingly ordinary man Hutch nonchalantly eating a steak below. His underlings surrounded Hutch. Julian secretly admired Hutch for daring to come straight to his doorstep. The two enemies who had never met were finally face to face. The thugs all pointed their guns at Hutch's head. He showed no fear. He pulled the white tablecloth off the table, revealing a claymore mine, a specialized anti-personnel weapon used on the battlefield. And its safety pin was hooked to Hutch's finger. Just a slight movement of his finger and everyone in the hall would die. This was why Hutch dared to come here. He told everyone to leave, wanting to have a civilized talk with Hutch alone. He still maintained the demeanor of a mob boss, but Hutch hadn't come to make peace, on the contrary. He had come to provoke him, because he knew that a man like Julian could never swallow his anger and let go. He wouldn't spare Hutch or his family. So, Hutch pulled out a wad of charred money from his pocket and threw it onto the table. Julian recognized it as money from the Obshek. At first, he tried to stay calm, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. He was so angry he started yelling curses, which was exactly the reaction Hutch wanted. He picked up the claymore mine, turned his back, and walked out of the bar, calmly passing by the enraged thugs and heading back to his challenger. After that, he waited, and sure enough, not long after, Julian stormed out of the bar in a rage. Hutch knew he had taken the bait. He started the challenger, deliberately revving the engine as he sped past him. This blatant provocation, and his challenger, was a tempting bait that triggered a chase by a long line of the gang's cars. Hutch led the whole Russian mob straight to his factory. Moment he got out of the car, Julian shot him in the shoulder. Julian fired wildly, wanting nothing more than to take Hutch down right at the factory door. At that critical moment, a second-floor window of the factory was shattered. A black man, armed with a Remington 700 sniper rifle, precisely took down the enemy, providing cover for Hutch. It turned out he was Hutch's adopted brother, Harry, the mysterious person he had been talking to every day on the walkie-talkie in his office. At the same time, Hutch's father also broke through the door. Joining this final party, it seemed the old man was itching for some fun too. With cover from his brother and father, Hutch ran inside the factory. He couldn't believe his father was so excited, smiling after all these years. It seemed the old man hadn't been in a fight for a long time and truly wanted a decisive battle. The main battle officially began, and the Russian mafia swarmed into the factory like a disturbed beehive. Hutch fired as he retreated with his father, conveniently activating the traps he had set up. On the second floor, His brother Harry was also taking down enemies one by one with his rifle. His sniping skills were masterful. He could not only take down enemies from a distance, but also use his rifle as a melee weapon. The most impressive thing was that, with just a single shot, he was able to blow off the heads of 3 people at once. Even the best esports players couldn't do that, and their old man, a true veteran, was wielding a Mossberg 500 shotgun, landing each shot directly on an enemy, a bullet for every life, and he seemed to be enjoying it immensely. Hutch used the prearranged traps to take on 10 men by himself. He was being chased relentlessly, so he hid behind a refrigerator and suddenly remembered he had a hidden pistol inside, which he immediately took advantage of. The 3 of them worked together and in no time had wiped out the entire mob. The moment the 3 of them stood back to back, fighting, brought back wonderful memories from their past. But Julian's appearance shattered that dream. A bullet hit his elder brother's shoulder, so the 3 of them quickly took cover behind a machine. Julian's firepower was too overwhelming. He was firing crazily, and at this point, all 3 of them were out of ammo. Seeing Julian about to charge, Hutch suddenly remembered he still had a devastating weapon he hadn't used yet. So he gritted his teeth, raised a riot shield, and charged straight out. Both of them were thrown back by the blast, but in the end, Hutch managed to get up while Julian was blown to pieces. His flesh and blood splattered everywhere. This time, the 3 of them had played a high-stakes game and enjoyed every minute of it. So everyone felt an immense sense of satisfaction. Hutch didn't let his father and older brother stay for long, as the police were on their way and he still had to deal with them. After seeing them off, he called his former superior. As he was talking, he suddenly heard a cat meow. He found an adorable kitten in a pipe, and the first scene of the movie was recreated. The police officers looked at Hutch, not knowing what to say or how to deal with him. Just then, the police officer's phone rang. He received a call from his superior ordering him to release the man. Both police officers were stunned. Hutch's family moved to a new home, and the new house was absolutely wonderful. The couple still cautiously asked the real estate agent if the house had a basement. As for Hutch's father and older brother, they drove around in an RV, traveling everywhere. If you ever happen to meet them, remember to be polite because the luggage they're carrying will shock you.